King's Quest. I've been dipping in and out of this series on the channel for a very long time now. Since like 2013 actually. But not once in that time have I gone back to look at the game that started it all. This classic Sierra series, created by industry pioneer Roberta Williams, has captured the hearts and minds of many gamers over the years, spanning several sequels and a reboot in 2015, which unfortunately hasn't continued yet. And that's a huge shame because it was honestly great, and managed to tie together the loose lore of each game into a very neat package, giving new dimensions to some classic villains. But today we're going back, way back to the start of it all. King's Quest I: Quest for the Crown was released back in 1984, when I was negative 13 years old, and it was originally released for the ill-fated IBM PC Junior, and then the IBM PC and Tandy 1000 computers. It wasn't Quest for the Crown initially though, that subtitle was added later. First it was simply known as King's Quest, and called itself the most fun you'll ever have playing adventure games, boasting three-dimensional graphics of unparalleled quality. Yeah, that's quite cute in retrospect, isn't it? But really, this game was a huge leap forward for graphic adventure games. It might look primitive now, but this was groundbreaking at the time. The character could walk in front of and behind objects. What? Of course, it's not really 3D, but it was more 3D than anyone had ever seen at that point. I mean, compare it to Sierra's previous adventure, The Wizard and the Princess. Yeah, King's Quest is the story of Sir Graham, a knight of Daventry who undertakes a quest at the behest of a king. I mean, that is in the title after all. Also, this depiction of Graham from the 2006 collection's manual is the version we all know and love. He's buff, he's handsome, he's ready to save the day. However, here's how Graham was originally depicted in the 1984 manual. Just a little guy, a little creature. It's so funny to put these two side by side. It's like one of those Virgin and Chad memes. Throughout, you explore the land of Daventry, avoid danger, and recover lost treasures. It started a saga that put the adventure game genre on the throne of computer games for well over a decade, before the shooty bang bangs would stage a coup. So now, the age-old Scarfulhu question is this: which version do I play? King's Quest I actually has 3 separate versions, and that's putting it on the lower side. But chiefly, there's the 1984 AGI version, the 1990 SCI version, and the 2001 VGA fan remake by AGD Interactive. Yes, I know that's a lot of abbreviations. All of these versions have something to offer, with the SCI remake being my personal favourite. What's surprising to me is that this version was initially heavily criticised, saying it destroyed the classic and it was like colorizing a black and white film. Funny, I guess gamers have always been gamers when it comes to remakes. But that reaction prevented any further remakes like this from happening, which is kind of a shame. Still, I'd like to look at the game in its original form today. Well, almost. The version that you can play these days is the slightly altered DOS version, which took out a few sounds and added music to the title screen. I'm also running it through ScumVM, so it's the version that lets me click to move, but I'm still playing with keyboard controls and parser. It just means that sometimes I'll forget to take the cursor off the screen, like a teacher playing a YouTube video. I'm sorry. But yeah, for those of you not in the know, adventure games weren't always point and click. That didn't come in until a little bit later on. Until then, adventure games were parser based, where arrow keys would move the character and specific actions would need to be typed in. This system has its charm, but also its frustrations. There's a lot of, I don't know what that means, and you're not close enough responses. It can get kind of annoying. But parser games essentially act as the missing link between text adventures and the more traditional point-and-click adventure. I must admit, I do quite like the parser. It's fun to type things out, and sometimes you can just kind of amuse yourself with it. Now, the IBM PC Junior didn't do that well, so initially King's Quest sold poorly, but it was soon ported to other systems, including DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, and even the Sega Master System, which I suppose technically count as a 4th different version of the game. This one looks very odd. So without further ado, let's see how the classic King's Quest series began. The game begins with this little intro scroll and a rendition of Greensleeves. It's basic, but it fills me with the warm fuzzies, you know, I'm ready for adventure. And then you're thrown in, outside the walls of Castle Daventry, surrounded by a moat filled with dangerous reptiles. In the AGI version, they're alligators, but in later versions, they're these weird snake creatures. And yes, you can immediately fall into this moat. I wonder how many people had that as their first experience with the game. I think it was mine, honestly. But if you can surpass the perilous trials of this one linear bridge, you can make it into the castle, and into the throne room of King Edward. Make sure to bow before you speak to him. Just manners, innit? Also, yes, points. Old Sierra games had a point system. Think of it like a checklist of things you need to do throughout the game, where you would only get the top score if you find all the optional things as well as the necessary things, one of which is bowing to the king. The story of this king is a sad one, and it's told in more detail in the manual, but essentially, King Edward the Benevolent was a wise and kind ruler who dreamt of having an heir to continue his legacy. The future-telling magic mirror showed a wise and kind prince that would do this, and so Edward and his wife attempted many times to have children, but they found that they could not. Matters became worse when Edward's wife's health worsened, and he used the treasures to attempt to bargain for her life to no avail. Edward was left without his queen, without his treasures, and without hope for the future of himself or his kingdom. Until one day, he noticed that the prince he saw in the mirror years before was not his own son. It was the face of Sir Graham, one of his bravest knights. So in order to solidify this, he tasks Graham with the recovery of his 3 treasures: the magic mirror, the chest of gold, and the shield of invincibility. If he could do that, he would surely be worthy to become Edward's heir. I also want to point out that this story moment in the manual is depicted like this. I love this illustration of Edward. There's so much you could do with this image, it's great. Still, now you can go off and explore the land of Daventry, at which point you'll discover that this place is just straight up out to kill you. Wolves can kill you, witches can kill you, water can kill you, a lot of W words can kill you. But you can also die to some very silly things. For instance, one screen left of the castle is this rock, which you can roll aside. Just don't stand beneath it. I remember this cracking me up the first time I played. It still does, honestly. How do you manage this, Graham? How do you roll a rock onto yourself? Imagine being Edward and watching Graham from the window as he walks a few feet away from the castle and immediately squashes himself with a rock. It's just very funny to me. Beneath this rock though is a dagger, we'll be needing that. In fact, a lot of the game is simply wandering around and finding items that are either hidden or not so hidden. But still, let's approach this methodically. You can get each treasure in any order, but this is the order that I like best. The magic mirror is probably the most iconic of the treasures in the series. It makes an appearance in nearly every subsequent game after this, even Mask of Eternity. It's also the easiest to get in this one, which is surprising when you consider that it's guarded by a fire-breathing dragon. Spoilers. So what do you need to do? Well... but yes, we do need to go down here. Though first, the bucket is necessary. You'll see why. Cut it off the rope with the dagger and then lower the rope using the winch at the side and climb on down. So why would you know to look down here? It's a little obtuse, I mean many of these games were at this time, but there is a slight hint in the manual. Essentially the magic mirror was given to a sorcerer who kept it in his dwelling, where he set a beast to guard it. It's a little bit of foreshadowing, and dwelling contains the word well. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but it's all you get. Anyhow, once you make it to the bottom of the well, you need to act fast or Graham gets tired and drowns. So quickly take some water in the bucket you cut loose and type dive. Quickly swim through the passage on the left and you'll find the dragon and its boon. Side note, the dragon looks way cooler in the SCI version. What's really cool though is that King's Quest I has multiple ways to tackle problems, each worth more or less points. This is one of those instances. You can choose violence and toss the dagger at the dragon, or you can throw the water from the bucket. You do need to be in the right position to do this, or else you'll just spill the water on the floor. But either method is viable, it's just that the pacifist route is worth more. The reason that this game has several solutions is that when IBM requested a game from Sierra, one of the things they wanted was replayability. So this one in particular has a number of ways you can solve different problems. I always think that's a neat feature in adventure games and it doesn't happen often enough. And from there you can grab the mirror and leave. Following the dragon takes you to a cave which leads back out into Daventry, but you'll get more points if you swim back the way you came and climb out the well. But hey, that's the first treasure nabbed. I told you it was easy. Our next treasure to find is the chest full of everlasting gold. This one was stolen after King Edward was tricked by a witch and then it was swooped up into the clouds. So that's our hint here. We need to get up into the clouds. This particular part of the game is very fairy tale heavy, so you might be able to guess what that means, but first we need to get across this bridge, which is of course guarded by a troll. Once again, this is not a troll you can put in a bag, but if you keep thinking about fairy tales, you should be able to put 2 and 2 together. 3 Billy Goats Gruff is a story in which a troll on a bridge is dispatched by a rather grumpy old goat. So, is there a grouchy little goat we can befriend? Yes, there is. Tempting this goat with a carrot from the farm gets him to follow you, and as goats are natural sworn enemies of trolls, the situation is soon dealt with. It's also a little unimpressive in this version. Something I didn't know for a long time is you can actually use your various treasures to bargain with the troll, although this does cost you points to do. Across this bridge is a gnome who dares Sir Graham to guess his name, and if correct, the brave knight will be bestowed a treasure. Now, this might be the most infamous part of King's Quest I. Your knowledge of fairy tales might lead you to believe that this is Rumpelstiltskin. And well, you're only half right. The gnome says you're close, but no cigar. The hint for this is actually found in the witch's house, so let's head there instead. This witch is obviously based on the one from Hansel and Gretel, with the house being made of gingerbread and such. You can even give it a quick bite. As you begin to eat the house, a squeaky voice from somewhere says, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" Me. It's delicious. The witch may or may not be in the house. It's a random dice roll whenever you enter, but if she's not, you can go in safely. Safely might not be the right word since she can come back at any time. It could happen very quickly or it could take a while, but this playthrough had her turn up quite fast. You do get sufficient warning though, so you have time to hide in the back room. The witch mutters, "I am going to get my oven ready to cook someone for dinner. Yum." Oh, someone's getting cooked alright. If you've opened up the furnace, you can recreate the classic Hansel and Gretel scene by shoving her into the oven. This might seem a bit harsh, but it's worth points, so I guess her life matters less than the dragon. A shame really. She was good at throwing it back. But more importantly, in her bedroom is a note that reads, "Sometimes it is wise to think backwards." This is actually about the gnome's name. Not that there's any way of knowing that, of course, you just kind of have to guess. So okay, how about Rumpelstiltskin spelt backwards? But that's not the answer either. At least not in this version. No, it's more obtuse than that here. By backwards, the game means that you have to reverse the alphabet and use those letters, which results in this name here. Yes, that is his name. Why? Why would you do this? How would you even pronounce it? Iffen Cover Grogherprum? That's a key smash, not a name. Although I would argue that it's not too bad, since if you don't get his name right, you can still beat the game, as he gives you a key. It's worth less points, but you're not locked out of beating the game. You see, this key unlocks another pathway forwards. If you do get it right though, even the game seems surprised, calling it an outstanding accomplishment. And with your success, the gnome gives you some very familiar magic beans. One thing which is pretty cool is the puzzle grouping here. All the puzzles that take from old fairy tales are in some way related to this particular part of the game. It's something I only really noticed while writing this, but I like that. Let's be real, this game is pretty frustrating to play without a guide. So it's cool to see that a little bit of good puzzle design was in there, especially this far back. There's some design in here which would absolutely be foundational for later entries in the series and other adventure games entirely. And when you consider that this game didn't really have a guidebook to work off of, that's really neat. Before we continue on, I do need to mention this screen here. You'll be greeted by an elf, who, when talked to, gives you a ring of invisibility. There are quite a few random little events in these early King's Quests. Some of them just protect you briefly and others give you key items. This is one of those items. But back to business. We've got beans. Magic beans. This, of course, relates to Jack and the Beanstalk, the story in which a boy plants magic beans and climbs a beanstalk that leads to a heart-racing adventure involving a giant. So, plant them in this patch of dirt and boom, a beanstalk leading into the clouds. Now this is my personal least favourite part of the game. Graham needs to climb this beanstalk, but you can't set a foot wrong or you'll fall. From the first screen, it's fine, but from the second and third, you will die. I definitely struggled with this initially, but on repeated playthroughs, I do know a few tricks. Number one, on the first screen, you can just hold up. Simple. On the second, you can go up to here, then shift to the side a bit, and then keep going up. The third screen has more shifts to make. This bit near the top is especially fiddly. Either way, you can just save scum your way through, really. Eventually, you'll make it up to the top, and the classic fairy tale suggests you'll find a deadly giant up here. And oh, there he is. Once again, you can deal with this situation violently or peacefully. The violent solution is used when you don't have an invisibility ring. Essentially, hidden in one of the trees up here is a sling, and if you use a sling against the giant, he drops down dead. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Whose blood do you smell now, eh? On the other hand, being invisible means he'll eventually fall asleep, and you can steal the chest from under his nose. Either way, the chest is recovered, but worry not, you won't need to climb back down the beanstalk. Instead, this cave back here leads to some stairs which will take you back down to Daventry Farmer. You might be wondering if some of the other story details are present from Jack and the Beanstalk as well, and there is a golden goose egg in a tree down in Daventry, but all that does is net you extra points. That's actually pretty common in these games. There are points allocated to hidden treasures you find scattered around. For instance, there's also a pouch of diamonds in this tree stump. It doesn't do much, but it feels cool to find, and you can use these as bargaining chips for various monsters. Anyhow, time for the final treasure. This one is probably the most involved of them all, which is why I like to save it until last. But before we get into it, let me just talk about the gameplay for a second. One thing you might have noticed while on the go is that the speeds here are frustrating. This is remedied in the later King's Quests, but Graham's walking speed here is either a bit too slow or Sonic speed, which can also be deadly. Plus, speed not only affects Graham, but everything else as well, so use it at your peril. Anyhow, let's move on to our third and final treasure, the magic shield of invincibility. Whoever holds this would not fall in battle, and its absence led to the kingdom getting a little, ransacked. The manual indicates that it was traded away to a dwarf by Edward in exchange for a cure for his wife. A cure which turned out to not work. Poor Edward could not catch a break. Dwarves do have a habit of being thieves in the early King's Quests, only really redeeming themselves in King's Quest IV. However, dwarf might be a bit of a misnomer for our resident shield swindler here. At the very least, it's not with a dwarf now. There is a dwarf around, but he doesn't have it. Looking through this tiny hole, you can see some green light. And what does that mean? It means that there are leprechauns living underground, of course. Bit of a stretch, I know, but it is true. There are leprechauns down here. Not the malevolent Warwick Davis kind, but will still need some protection. First of all, there's a patch of clovers, and you'll need to pick the one with 4 leaves, naturally. Secondly, we need to help out these folks here, the woodcutter and his wife. Daventry has fallen on hard times, you see. It's not just Edward. All is subject to suffering too. If only they had a way to feed themselves more effectively. Maybe we could help out in some way. As it turns out, someone left this bowl lying around. A bowl that says Phil at the bottom. Kinda weird, huh? But if you type Phil, it fills up with stew. Quite handy indeed. And giving this everlasting stew to the woodcutter means he'll offer his fiddle in return. Perfect. Leprechauns love a good fiddle. That came out wrong. Lastly, make sure to grab the cheese from the witch's house. Cheese has nothing to do with leprechauns, but all will become clear. As a matter of fact, taking all the food you can is practically a rule in the early games. You can almost guarantee that you'll need it for somewhere or someone. Now that we have what we need for our leprechaun expedition, we need to catch a ride. The entrance isn't in this area, and this is also a very good point to save as it's a one-way trip. That entrance we saw was far too small for Graham after all, so we need to find another way in. The way ahead here is via Condor. You heard me right, Condor. On this screen here, you'll see a condor flying about, and you need to jump and catch the bird at precisely the right time, at which point Graham will latch on and it'll give you a lift. I remember this being an absolute pain in the SCI version, but it seems to be much easier in the AGI version. Plus, this version doesn't have the annoying loop of music. Look, I mean, I love the SCI version's added soundtrack. I mean, this original version doesn't really even have a soundtrack, but that one loop is burned into my brain. The condor will drop you here, an area ordinarily inaccessible due to this river. You might also ask how the player is supposed to know to use the condor to get here, and the answer is, well, I don't really know either. I don't have a rationale for this one. Still, once Graham is here, you'll quickly discover a hole to jump down. A hole which you shouldn't jump down just yet. You must resist the temptation. Instead, go left and take this mushroom. You have no other opportunity to get this mushroom. Once you do jump down, there's no way back up, you see. And it isn't much longer before you run into a rodent of unusual size. This nasty slobbering critter is guarding the door. If you try to tussle with him, he will win. But there is one thing he does like.
Cheese.
He likes cheese. Cheese is good. You see, the reason you take food in King's Quest is usually you can placate a person or creature with it, as is the case here. Past this ratty door is the realm of the Leprechauns. And here, if you didn't have the clover, you would be dead. In order to secure their ceasefire with Graham though, you need to play the fiddle for them, which gets them to dance into non-existence. I don't know how that works. And then their king just up and leaves. With this, you can have the scepter and the magic shield. The final problem though is one of leaving here. There's no way for Graham to get out, at least not at this size. Remember that small hole though? Well, if you take an Alice in Wonderland approach and eat the mushroom, Graham shrinks for a moment, allowing you to escape. With all three treasures conquered, the danger of the land overcome, it's time for Graham to return to Castle Daventry. Now, don't worry about the wolves and other threats anymore, the shield actually protects you. Enter the castle, bow to the king and return his magic treasures. And King Edward is so pleased, he bestows his kingdom to Graham and dies on the spot. Literally, he just up and dies and Graham just takes the throne right away. That is cold. It's even funny in the SCI version with all the subjects cheering on Graham while Edward's corpse lay slumped on the steps. Poor guy. Still, this King's Quest has been fulfilled, and that's the whole game. The question is, does this adventure still hold up? Well, no and yes. No, because there's certainly a lot of dated design philosophy here. A lot of puzzles which are incredibly difficult to figure out and so on. It's a game that was built to take a long time to finish, with the necessity of hint books and hint lines, you know? The classic Sierra style, which would continue for another 15 years beyond this. That might turn off potential players now, and I get it. It has many dead ends and many unfair deaths. That can be unfun. But I would also say yes, this does still hold up, because I kind of love this game. It's very short and I've finished it several times now. And I have pretty much all of the game committed to memory across the various versions. So much so, I wrote this entire script without any recorded gameplay footage. I just know it that well. It wouldn't stick around if it didn't have something to offer. And what it does offer is a foundation for a blossoming genre. A highly imperfect game which oozes so much charm. There's a lot here that works well. And you know, I don't think we'd have Monkey Island if King's Quest hadn't done things both right and wrong. Adventure games would not be adventure games without the efforts of Roberta Williams and Sierra. And for that, I love King's Quest. It's a game and a series that I keep close to my heart. And it's matters of the heart that would be the plot of the 1985 sequel, Romancing the Throne. So maybe we'll have a look at that one too at some point. Until then, stay safe, and don't roll any rocks onto yourself. I mean, come on.